Hello and welcome back to Nathan Bell's podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Today, Nate would like to talk about ice use.
Right, today I'm going to talk about ice use. A lot of people think that I use ice. People have told me before that I look like an ice user. That's fine. I'm just a scruffy bipolar schizoaffective man. It doesn't mean I use ice. I've never used ice in my life. Before I was 20, sort of between the age of 17 and 20, I used speed probably a few times, probably about 10, 15 times. I experimented with speed. I didn't take it with needles. I've never used needles to take drugs in my life. I drunk the speed. I put water in the sappy and then drunk the speed. And that was interesting, and it sort of elevates your mood and makes you feel faster, like you can move faster and do things quicker, and that's fine. But I've never used ice, and I certainly look around the community. I live in Hamilton now, and there's definitely a lot of people who use ice in Hamilton, and man, it destroys some people. It's crazy. I've been busking in Newcastle Street performing for over 10 years, and the amount of people I have met who have said to me, can you get some ice? Can you get any ice? I'm on ice. It's just amazing how many people use ice. And what I want to point out, and this is why it needs to be decriminalised, why we need decriminalisation, because some people want to paint this picture that the only people who are using ice and hard drugs are welfare recipients and minority groups. That's not true. I have met dozens, hundreds of working Australians who are on ice on the weekend when they go out clubbing. Because I play music to people between the hours of sort of 7 at night and 3 in the morning out the front of busy nightclubs. And I have met hundreds of working Australians, middle class Australians who are out on the weekend at the clubs and they are on ice. So it's interesting. And the other thing that's interesting is I've observed, ice addiction creeps up on some people and it absolutely ruins their life and they lose their whole lives to the addiction to ice and other hard drugs. And then other people sort of I know people who I've met who have ice once every 6 months, and that's all they do. So what's the go? And it seems to me that addiction is very much rooted in the individual. Some people seem to get addicted to drugs very badly, and other people seem to be able to take drugs every now and again and not get addicted. And this is why I think what we need to do is decriminalise drugs in general and treat those who have a problem, an addiction, as if they have a medical condition, because addiction doesn't affect everyone. And it's interesting, I see the same thing with cigarette smokers. I know most people who smoke cigarettes get very heavily addicted to cigarettes and struggle to give up. But in my life, I've known numerous people who will buy a packet of smokes, smoke the packet of smokes over a few days, and then not smoke cigarettes again for a year. Then a year later, they'll buy a packet of cigarettes, they'll smoke the packet of cigarettes over a few days, and then they won't smoke again for a year. And the same thing with ice users. I've met many ice users who have ice once every 6 months, and that's all they use. So I'm led to the conclusion that some people are more prone to addiction than other people. So what we need to do is decriminalise, and for those people who are struggling with addiction, we need to treat that as a medical issue, and we need to put them into rehabilitation. And the other thing is, I don't want to punish people who are suffering. And I've talked about this sort of thing before about decriminalising drugs, but we'll go over it again. We shouldn't punish people who are caught up in this trap of addiction. We should give them rehabilitation and treatment and help them rebuild their lives through rehabilitation. But yeah, I've seen what ice does to some people, because I know lots of ice users in the community in Hamilton, and a lot of them think that I use ice, and they come up to me and ask me if I can get any ice. One day they'll realise I don't use ice. but I've seen people whose lives have just fallen apart. And I know a couple of guys. I know a guy who used to live in the building I used to live in over the other end of town. And many years ago, you could have a conversation with him. This was before he got on the ice. You could have a conversation with him, and he was a reasonable, level-headed guy. Then he got on the ice, and over the last few years, I've just watched him deteriorate more and more and more. And I believe he still has a place through housing, but he has just absolutely deteriorated. And now all he does every day is just pace up and down the street in Hamilton, off his head on ice, just pacing up and down the street. And you see these people all the time who are off their head on ice, just pacing up and down the street. But some people also do that because they have mental health issues as well. So you just don't know. So don't judge, because a person might be pacing up and down the street and acting erratic and crazy, and they might not be on ice. Don't make the assumption they're on ice. They may just have schizophrenia. You just don't know. But I know that ice is a very, very powerful drug, a very addictive drug for most people who use it, and it really wrecks people's heads and sends them into psychosis and wrecks their thinking. But as I said, I know some people who use it every now and again, and it doesn't seem to have that impact on them. So as I said, I'm led to the conclusion that some individuals are more prone to addiction and mental health responses to these drugs than other people. And I think I've read some research that suggests that. But overwhelmingly, ice is a very dangerous drug, and I think for most people who use it, it ends up having very negative impacts. And even if they can use it for a while and not get addicted, inevitably, I think once you've been using it for long enough, you will get very addicted, and then they fall into the street lifestyle and begging and stealing to pay for their addiction. And it just ruins people's lives. But we need rehabilitation for people, and we need to give people treatment and help them rebuild their lives and slowly get them off the drugs. But yeah, look, the impact it's had on the community and the crime it creates, I don't deny it. I see it every day in Hamilton because there are so many people. There's such a bad ice problem in Newcastle. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the city of Australia, but certainly in Newcastle, and particularly in Hamilton, where I live now, there is such a bad ice problem. There are so many people up the street who are abusing ice, and now, I try not to judge people because I love all people as human beings and I value all human life, but they cause so many problems in the community, walking up and down the street, screaming and shouting, talking to themselves, being erratic, threatening people in the street, smashing things. You see this stuff every day in Hamilton, just every day, people smashing walls, punching, screaming at strangers, and it's always these dishevelled people, and you must be led to the conclusion that they're on ice. But as I said, sometimes those people just have schizophrenia and just have mental health issues. But yeah, I think, I'm glad I've never used ice. I'm sure if I used it, it would destroy my life and would send me spiralling out of control because I have a very addictive personality. So yeah, I've certainly never used ice, and I steer clear of it because I've seen what it does to people. But I do believe decriminalisation is the answer, because you shouldn't punish people who are suffering an addiction. We need to treat addiction as a medical issue. Yeah, and I do support legal injecting rooms and stuff, because as a health issue, we need people to have clean needles because it stops the spread of HIV and hepatitis and stuff. And there needs to be a safe place where people, because you have to accept that people who are addicted to these drugs, and it used to be like this with heroin, now it's like this with ice, you have to accept that they're going to do this until you help them beat the addiction. Until they can beat the addiction, they're going to regularly shoot ice. That's what they're going to do. And it doesn't matter what laws and policing you bring in to try and stop them, until they can be helped to beat the addiction, they are going to find a way to shoot ice. So it's better to have a shooting room where there's clean needles and medical equipment provided, so that we can stop the spread of HIV and hepatitis C and stuff like that, which is spread through needles. And it's interesting, a lot of people don't understand about shooting drugs. I'm not a medical expert, but as I understand, needles is actually the safest way to take a lot of drugs, and that's why, almost exclusively when you get certain treatments from doctors and from the hospital, they give you a needle. Like, I get a needle every fortnight for my antipsychotic injection. And I'm hoping to transition back onto oral medication soon. I was not obeying the rules for a while there. That's why they made me take the fortnightly injection. But doctors give you a needle. At the hospital, they give you a needle. So understand, inherently using a needle to take drugs is not inherently dangerous. It's actually one of the cleanest ways to take drugs. Using needles is one of the safest ways to take drugs. Of course, it should be administered by a medical professional, a nurse or a doctor, ideally. But a lot of people can't see that. They put the two in. They put illegal drug use for needles and doctors giving you needles into different categories. Well, it's exactly the same thing. But anyway, there's a bit of a rant about ice and some thoughts about ice and ice use and generally hard drug use. So drop a comment in the comment section what you think about that.